The summoner was enraged by the tale that the friar told, quaking in anger. "Since he says you have all listened to the friar lie, please do listen to my tale." The summoners claim that friars and friends are one and the same. He tells a short anecdote in his prologue. One day, a friar was brought to hell and laid up down by an angel, and was surprised to see no friars there. "Are friars so graceful," he asked, "that they never come to hell?" The angel told him that many millions of friars came to hell, and led him directly to Satan. Satan had a tail as broad as a sailing ship, and the angel called to Satan to lift up his tail. Satan did, and 20,000 friars swarmed out of his arse like bees from a hive. A friar went to preach and beg in a marshy region of Yorkshire called Holderness. In his sermons, he begged for donations for the church, and afterward he begged for charity from the local residents. The friar interrupts, calling the summoner a liar, but is silenced by the host. Along went this friar, house by house, until he came to the house of Thomas, a local resident who normally indulged him, and found him ill. The friar spoke of the sermon he had given that day, commenting on the excellent way he had glossed the Bible text, and making the famous comment that glossing is a glorious thing, and essentially ordered a meal from Thomas' wife. She told the friar that her child died not more than 2 weeks before. The friar claimed that he had a revelation that her child had died and entered heaven. He claimed that his fellow friars had a similar vision, for they are more privy to God's message than laymen, who live richly on earth as opposed to spiritual riches. The friar claimed that, among the clergy, only friars remain impoverished and thus are closest to God, and told Thomas that his illness persists because he had given so little to the church. Thomas claimed that he had indeed given full many a pound to various friars, but never fared the better for it. The friar, characteristically, is irritated that Thomas is not giving all of his money solely to him, and points out to him that a farthing is not worth anything. Continuing to lecture Thomas, the friar began a long sermon against anger, telling the tale of an angry king who sentenced a knight to death, because, as he returned without his partner, the king automatically assumed that the knight had murdered him. When a third knight took the condemned knight to his death, they found the knight that he had supposedly murdered. When they returned to the king to have the sentence reversed, the king sentenced all three to death. The first because he had originally declared it, so the second because he was the cause of the first death, and the third because he did not obey the king. It was a drunk. When one of his knights claimed that drunkenness caused people to lose their coordination, Cambyses drew his bow and arrow and shot the knight's son to prove that he still had control of his reflexes. The friar then told of Cyrus, the Persian king who had the river Ganges destroyed because one of his horses had drowned in it. At the close of this sermon, the friar asked Thomas for money to build the brothers' cloister. Thomas, annoyed by the friar's hypocrisy, told the friar that he had a gift for him that he was sitting on, but that he would only receive it if he promised to split it up equally between each of the friars. The friar readily agreed and put his hand down behind Thomas' back, groping round, and Thomas let out a fart louder than a horse could make. The friar became immediately angry and promised to repay Thomas for his fart, but before he could, the servants of the house chased the friar out. The enraged friar found the lord of the village and told him of the embarrassment he suffered. Angrily, wondering how he was supposed to divide a fart into 12, the lord squire spoke up with a suggestion. In return for a gaunt cloth for his master, take a cartwheel and tell each of 12 friars to lay his nose at the end of a spoke. Then the friar of the tale could sit in the center of the wheel and fart, and each of the spokes would carry the smell along to the rim, and therefore divide it up between each of the friars.
The Summoner, a corrupt church official. The summoner embodies the vices of his profession. He is cunning, manipulative, and delights in exposing the hypocrisy of others, particularly the friar. His tale is a thinly veiled attempt to justify his own corrupt practices, revealing a deep-seated selfishness and lack of empathy. The friar, a target of the summoner's ire, is portrayed as a gluttonous hypocrite, more interested in personal gain than spiritual guidance. The summoner's tale paints him as a figure of ridicule, highlighting the hypocrisy within the church. Thomas, a simple, trusting farmer, Thomas becomes the victim of the summoner's manipulation. His naivety and desire to please make him an easy target, highlighting the vulnerability of the common man. Thomas' wife, a sharp-tongued and resourceful woman, Thomas' wife sees through the summoner's deception. She represents a voice of reason and common sense, challenging the authority of the corrupt church official. The knight, a figure of authority, is invoked by the summoner to lend weight on his claims. His presence highlights the power dynamics at play, demonstrating how even a respected figure can be manipulated for personal gain. Cambyses, a fictional king known for his cruelty. Cambyses is used by the summoner as an example of consequences of disobedience. This reference serves to reinforce the summoner's authority and justify his own harsh treatment of Thomas.
Hypocrisy and corruption of the church. Chaucer exposes the gap between what they preach and how they behave. The friar speaks about spiritual poverty but indulged in material wealth and selfish desires. The friar used the religion as a tool for personal profit, his manipulative tactics to get money, and his arrogance contrasted with the ideals of humility and charity that he supposedly represents. Greed. The friar is depicted as someone who uses his religious status to manipulate others for financial gain. Anger. Tomas' anger represents the frustration of a man who feels exploited by those who are supposed to offer him spiritual comfort. His growing anger reflects the broader resentment people in medieval society felt toward corrupt religious figures who use their spiritual authority to enrich themselves at the expense of the faithful. Revenge. Tomas, a layman, uses his wit and anger to expose the friar's greed, while the squire's clever suggestion further humiliates the friar. By using humor and satire, Chaucer highlights the power dynamics between the clergy and the laity, showing that even those without power can strike back at those who exploit them. Cleverness and wit. Thomas, despite being portrayed as a sick and suffering man, uses wit to outsmart the friar. He cleverly offers the friar a gift that he claims is hidden under him. Thomas' wit lies in the fact that he knows exactly how to humiliate the friar in a way that directly addresses the friar's greed.
The treasure trove of literary devices that contribute to its humor, satire, and social commentary. Here are a few notable examples. Irony. The summoner's tale is filled with irony, particularly in the way he uses his own corrupt practices to criticize the friar. His claims of moral superiority are undermined by his own actions, creating a sense of absurdity. Hyperbole. Chaucer uses exaggeration to create humor and emphasize the summoner's vices. The summoner's description of his own abilities and the friar's gluttony are examples of this technique. Allegory. The tale can be interpreted as an allegory for the corruption within the church and the struggle between good and evil. The characters and their actions represent broader themes and ideas. The summoner embodies the corruption within the church. His lust for money, his willingness to exploit others represent the hypocrisy and moral decay that plagues some church officials. The friar. Hypocrisy and greed, the friar's gluttony and self-serving nature expose the flaws within the church hierarchy. Thomas. He represents the common man, vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation by those in power. His gullibility and desperation makes him an easy target for the summoner's schemes. Thomas' wife. She embodies female cunning and resourcefulness. While initially submissive, she ultimately outsmarts the summoner, revealing her hidden strength and defiance. The knight. He represents the ideal of chivalry and justice, a stark contrast to the summoner's corrupt practices. His presence in the tale serves as a reminder of the values that the summoner has abandoned. Cambyses. The dangers of unchecked power. It highlights the consequences of abusing authority and the importance of justice.
The summoner's tale left me feeling a mixture of amusement and unease. His body humor and sharp wit were undeniably entertaining, but his blatant hypocrisy and willingness to exploit others for personal gain left a bitter aftertaste. The tale serves as a stark reminder that even in the face of corruption, laughter can be a powerful tool masking the ugliness beneath the surface. It begs the question, is the summoner truly a villain, or simply a reflection of the flawed human nature that exists within us all?